Hey folks, welcome to the lesson. It's the cosine ratio today. There are two other videos that go alongside this, the sine ratio and the tangent ratio. Let's crack on and get this job done. Trigonometry means three-angled measure, and it deals with angles in triangles. We're only looking at right-angled triangles, and in each case we will be given one length and one angle in the triangle, and we will be asked to find the length of one of the other sides. We absolutely need to know how to label our triangle. So if we have a given angle marked in there, imagine that's an eye looking out at the opposite side. So the eye of the angle always looks at the opposite side. The right angle always looks out onto the hypotenuse, and the third side we call the adjacent. Let's make sure we're clear. There's the angle. Imagine it's an eye. The eye of the angle looks at the opposite side. The right angle looks out onto the hypotenuse, and the third side is the adjacent. The reason it's so important to label our sides accurately is because cosine is a ratio of the adjacent to the hypotenuse. So for a given angle, the cosine of that angle will give you the ratio of the adjacent side to the hypotenuse. So for this particular triangle, the angle is marked in at point C. So cosine C is the adjacent, which is 12 centimeters, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 17 centimeters. And in this example, where we have a different angle marked in, this time at point A, cosine is still adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And we have our adjacent, which is 23 centimeters, our hypotenuse, which is 40 centimeters, and therefore the cosine of angle A is 23 divided by 40. Now, in this example, we have cosine 60 degrees is adjacent divided by the hypotenuse, which is 10 divided by x. If you press cosine 60 on your calculators, it will tell you that cosine 60 is 0.5. Therefore, 0.5 equals 10 divided by x. That will then tell us that x must be 20, because 10 divided by 20 is 0.5. You could be forgiven for thinking that these ratios, the cosine ratio, does it depend on the size of the triangle? And the answer to that question is no, it doesn't. It depends entirely on the size of the angle. In this case, if I put the protractor on the triangle, it shows us, measuring on the inside scale, that the angle is indeed 60 degrees. If I enlarge the shape, the angle still remains at 60 degrees. And in fact, I've enlarged the shape by 20%. So the side that was 10 centimeters is now 12 centimeters, and the side that was 20 centimeters is now 24 centimeters. But what has happened to the cosine ratio? Well, the ratio is still the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. Now it's 12 divided by 24, and that's still 0.5. And we know that cosine 60 is 0.5. Therefore, the cosine always gives us the ratio of the adjacent side to the hypotenuse, and it does not matter how big the triangle is, it only matters how big the angle is. And your calculator has these ratios programmed into it for any angle. So if you type into your calculator cosine 40 degrees, it will give you the ratio of the adjacent to the hypotenuse for a right angled triangle with an angle of 40 degrees in. We've established that cosine 60 degrees is 0.5, so the ratio of the adjacent to the hypotenuse must give us a fraction of 0.5. Here's another ratio of 0.5, 5 divided by 10, 9 divided by 18, 15 divided by 30, 3 divided by 6. So note the size of the triangle is not important, the angle is important, and cosine 60 degrees is 0.5. Let's see how we can use this in this example to find the length x. Just remember where the sides are. The eye of the angle looks at the opposite side. We want the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. So x is the adjacent and 14 is the hypotenuse. So we end up with cosine 38 degrees equals x divided by 14. If we multiply both sides by 14, we are left with x. Type that into our calculators to give us 11.032, and we round off to one decimal place. Here is example 2. Let's identify the opposite side. So from this we can see that x must be the adjacent and 30 must be the hypotenuse. Therefore cosine 57 degrees is x divided by 30. We multiply both sides by 30 to find x. We type that into our calculator and then we round off appropriately. On to example 3. There is the opposite side, so we know that x is a hypotenuse and therefore 11 must be the adjacent. So we have cosine 31 equals the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. That's 11 divided by x. Multiply both sides by x to get rid of the fraction. To leave x on its own, we needed to divide by cosine 31. Type that into our calculator and round off appropriately. We do have a shortcut available to us, but it's really important that we label the C, A, and H in the appropriate sections of the triangle. And now I'm going to show you how we use the shortcut. When finding the adjacent, we place our finger over the A for adjacent, and we're left with C and H next to each other. When we have two letters next to each other in maths, that means multiply by. So the adjacent is the cosine of the angle multiplied by the hypotenuse. However, when you are trying to find the hypotenuse, you put your finger over the H. That is telling us that the hypotenuse must be the adjacent divided by cosine. Let's see how you would use the shortcut when we revisit example 2. In the example, we're trying to find x, which is the adjacent. So we put our finger over the A for adjacent, and we're left with C next to H, which means cosine of the angle times by the hypotenuse. We then tap that into our calculator, and then we round off appropriately. When revisiting example 3, 11 is the adjacent, and x, the side we're trying to find, is the hypotenuse. So we put our finger over the H for hypotenuse, and we're left with A divided by C, which means the adjacent divided by cosine of the angle. 11 divided by cosine 31 is 12.83, and we round off appropriately. Let us put all this together in a recap. Cosine is a ratio of the adjacent side to the hypotenuse in a right angled triangle. The eye of the angle looks at the opposite, the right angle looks at the hypotenuse, and so the third side must be the adjacent. You need to know how to label those sides. Cosine C would be the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. We can use the shortcut triangle if it helps. If you wish to find the adjacent side, put your finger over the A, and we're left with cosine times by the hypotenuse. If you wish to find the hypotenuse, put your finger over the H, and it's telling us that the hypotenuse is the adjacent side divided by the cosine of the angle. If there is anything about the video you haven't understood, just watch it back. If you have understood it, that's great, because that's job done.